All right, everybody, welcome back. Glad to have you for our next session of the day. And to those of you who are joining us for the first time today or even this week, welcome. Please note that the full schedule of events for the remainder of today and for tomorrow, as well as the code of conduct, is available on the website. So we are delighted to have you here for our second session today, Winston-Salem's Digitized Oral Histories, Academic and Museum Collaborations. I'm Molly Keener, Director of Digital Initiatives and Scholarly Communication at the Z. Smith Reynolds Library at Wake Forest University. And it is my pleasure to welcome today's presenters, Lisa Blee and Alanna Meltzer-Holderfield. Lisa is Associate Professor of History at Wake Forest University, where she teaches courses in public history, research methods, and U.S. history. She is also the coordinator for the Cultural Heritage and Preservation Studies program and directs internships, individual student research, and course projects in partnership with local museums and institutions. Alanna is Operations and Program Manager at MUSE Winston-Salem, where she has worked since 2014. In this role, she leads the museum's Oral History Initiative, curates community programs, works on marketing and communications, development, supervises interns, and more. She also serves on the Forsyth County Historic Resources Commission. As Lisa and Alanna present their work, please enter your questions in the Q&A box. They will be addressed at the end of the session. So welcome, Lisa and Alanna. We look forward to hearing what you have to share.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thank you so much. Next slide, please. All right. So we've posed 3 questions that we'd like to address in our presentation for you all. And I'm so sorry I can't see all of your faces, but we'll be sure to address any questions that you might have or discussion topics at the end. So the purpose of our presentation is to talk about kind of where we each come from the academic perspective and from the museum professional perspective, and how we found some common goals, and then how we worked through our partnership to find the right digital tools, the right resources, the right training. And then we're going to offer a few models to really kind of get into the details of these collaborations. And hopefully then we can have a good discussion about the value of these collaborative efforts at the end. So the projects that, I guess the partnership that we're going to be talking about spans from 2014 to the present, but all of these features are still under construction, right? So the partnership is, in some cases, we have our models were kind of bounded by 1 semester course, but the resources and that partnership are ongoing and go beyond the bounds of 1 semester. All right, so next slide, please. Okay, so very important for any partnership, right, is determining where you might find some common ground, discussing where, what the learning outcomes are, at least from my perspective, right, and then what the museum's goals are as well. So from my perspective, I teach a number of courses in the history department. I teach public history, I teach history methods courses, I teach a research seminar, and then I also teach surveys that have, are content driven, but have the opportunity to create units where we do address issues in public history. And I also can supervise some surveys, or sorry, some internships for students. So kind of more broadly, my interest in teaching these topics is to go beyond just historical content in my courses and to train students in certain research skills and to give them the opportunity to apply those skills in meaningful kind of public-facing projects. And so when it comes to oral history in particular, I think this is a fantastic topic and collection of resources to use to help students achieve those learning goals. So I like oral history because it provides students with an opportunity to create their own primary sources if they're conducting interviews themselves. This is a great way for students to learn about local history topics when published material is unavailable, which is pretty commonly the case in Winston-Salem history. Second, oral history really provides an opportunity for student researchers to interrogate new kinds of primary sources, that is, interviews as primary sources rather than just looking at texts. This gives them new approaches, right, that they can try out so they can bring a critical perspective to these interviews and think about issues of memory, how identity is formed, think about social change. And third, oral histories provide an opportunity to introduce students to archives, collections, some of these issues in public history. So they can learn about some of the theoretical and also ethical issues in public history, right? How one's interpretive choices have implications for community access, for how people find material and understand what that material means. And also, they can develop skills, right? So skills of critical reading and analysis in order to summarize the content of an oral history. And I'll talk more about this in our presentation, but also they have to use these analytical skills to select keywords and themes when they're when they're analyzing these oral histories and turning them into public-facing projects.
So, hi everybody. Thanks again for having us. As Lisa said, I wish we could see you all, but thanks for being here today. So real quick, just a brief background on MUSE Winston-Salem for anybody who is not familiar. We are a local community history museum. We were formerly called New Winston Museum, and we opened in 2012 in a small building near Old Salem. And we sold that building in 2017. With the goal of moving to a bigger space and somewhere that maybe had more foot traffic and hoping to be able to reach more people in a new space. So we were in temporary office space for the past couple of years. And then just earlier this year, we moved into our new home at 226 South Liberty Street. And we're very excited about it. Have to undergo renovations and do a lot of that work before we can reopen here to the public. And of course, with the pandemic, who knows what the timeline will be. So it's all in progress, but we have a new home and we're excited about it. And eventually you can all come and see it. And you can see we announced earlier in January the new home and the new name all at the same time and went through that rebranding effort and updated our mission and vision statements as well. You can see our new mission statement is here on the screen. And if you read that, you'll see that storytelling is central to our work, and it always has been, and oral history has always been one of our main focuses since the conception of the museum. So that continues with our focus on oral history and programming and conversations and being a place that people can gather and talk and learn from each other. So we will continue and intensify those efforts in our new space. So as far as why it's always been important with us to work on oral histories, and we've had many partnerships with universities and students in the area, including this long-term partnership with Lisa and her students, as well as other students at Wake Forest University that we've seen great results from. And there are many reasons why we want to continue working with students and higher education institutions in the area. You know, there's the obvious benefits for MUSE, such as anytime we can add to our collection of oral histories or have, clean up the archive or have students work on the indexing, that's making our collection better, and we want to just always continue to build it. So that's one aspect of it. But oral history can be a real form of outreach for the museum and can also be a real great connector for students as they get to meet people in the community that if they're conducting the interviews or if they're studying interviews recorded with local people, it can spark an interest in local history that they may not have had before, and also, get them firsthand experience that they can use and carry on with them in recording and learning the technology, or doing other projects that they do with that. They can carry that experience through to many things, and it's great for them to get a glimpse of museum work and nonprofit work, and make that history personalize it and make it more relatable for them, I think is really valuable. And then just, again, those connecting and network opportunities can be something that's really long lasting for them, that will be beneficial throughout their school career and beyond, I think. And next slide, please.
So at the outset of any partnership, right, you need to kind of determine what the goals are. Now that you've found a connection, we had this shared interest in oral histories, oral history collections, and getting students involved, right, in local history. So then we had to think about, well, we had to have the answers to some questions about our partnership, right? So we had to think about what resources and tools we would need in order for students to do interviews, what kind of hardware we'd need in order to store those interviews, right? And who would do the purchasing or the grant writing to acquire those materials. So in our case, we kind of did an inventory of recording devices and interview space and kind of data storage. And so I believe we acquired some of the material. We ultimately, at least I ultimately found out that students' iPhones are pretty much the best recording devices out there after we purchased a few. But now we have kind of a shared collection of recording devices. We also talked about the best place for students to conduct their interviews. And it's unfortunate, but something kind of we had to recognize. Wake Forest is not always the most welcoming place for community members in Winston-Salem, but the museum had a really nice, big, quiet room where people, interviewees, might feel like it's kind of a neutral ground and a safe place to be interviewed. And so we thought about that space as well. And Alanna.
Okay, and I'll just actually add on to what you were just saying, Lisa, about using the museum space to record. And will actually become even easier in our new building. We're planning to create a small oral history recording studio. So that will be something that we'll be able to utilize a lot for this partnership, and then maybe even for, maybe it might even be something that people can access, on their own during museum hours. That remains to be seen, but it'll be a space that we can share that'll be part of this partnership going forward. So then just to talk about the status of the collection and the process of getting that collection into the place that it is now. So when I started at the museum in 2014, there are already some oral history interviews in our archive in various formats, in various states of completion that had been done not only in those past 2 years that the museum had been open, but there were actually some that had been done before that by volunteers who had been working to start the museum, who had done oral histories to gather some material for the museum. So there had been a damaged hard drive issue that a lot of what I was trying to sort through was kind of in pieces. So I spent a lot of time in those first couple of years figuring out how to deal with all of that and what format it should be in, and how should we be storing this, and how do we make sure we never have those problems again. And so went through all of that, as well as creating an inventory database that didn't exist prior to that. So we worked on all of that, and we realized, of course, we needed cloud storage. So we did set up a SoundCloud account that we will talk more about in a minute, but we started that, which was really helpful. And we also started storing the interviews physically in triplicate on our premises. We're still working on some other stuff like physical storage in other locations and like deep storage. I'm not sure if I know the right term, like deep cloud storage, where you can store, you guys all probably know what I'm talking about, where you can store a lot of data in a less expensive way when you don't have to access it all the time and just keep it safe somewhere. So we're still kind of like learning about all of those things, but we do have it stored a lot more safely than it has been in the past, and working on that. And then through the partnership with Lisa as well, some of it has already also been stored in Z. Smith Reynolds Library on a hard drive, which is great as well. And we hope to be able to continue to do that in the future too. So so we got SoundCloud and have moved forward with a much cleaner inventory and all of that. And then when we get student interns, we will train them. We usually have them come to the museum, and myself and or one of our main oral history volunteers that we have will kind of sit down with them and talk to them about SoundCloud and the other platforms we use that Lisa will tell you about in a minute, and go over those with them. I think, Lisa, you're next. Did I cover everything on that? And then you want to talk about student training or the next platform?
Yeah, so I'll just make a quick point about the third bullet point there. We did discuss, right, what was the ultimate goal for each of us, right? And for the museum, it was to create an accessible website, right? A public-facing tool where, yeah, the MUSE Winston-Salem could be this clearinghouse for local oral histories, right? And then my goal was to think about how students could contribute to that effort, right? And so we put our heads together, right? And SoundCloud was an efficient way to store those oral histories from the museums, for the museum's purposes. And then I also did some research to find digital platforms that might allow students, well, they were easy enough to use that students could use them in a way that could contribute to the museum's ultimate goal of creating a really dynamic, helpful web page. So then as our partnership developed, right, like I would train students in the kind of creating the metadata and presentation in the back end for what would be then kind of plugged into the website for the the MUSE Winston-Salem website later. And then, yeah, for interns, Alanna would take over the training of those students. But it was a kind of a discussion we had to have, right? Who's doing the training and how are we going to train ourselves, right? In using these accounts, setting up and using these accounts as well. We had to determine which accounts would be accessible to students and which would we just limit to museum staff or include me and volunteers, right? So we kind of had to lay down the ground rules for accessing these different accounts as well. All right, next slide.
So this is just a screen capture from SoundCloud, and you see it still says New Winston Museum. But so as we mentioned, we set this up early on when we were just kind of figuring out cloud storage, and then it wound up having a lot more usefulness than that, of course. And it dovetails with Ohms, and it's actually, you have to have a program such as SoundCloud to make Ohms work. So it was perfect that we had started using this because it's how Ohms can access those interviews. So it's, yeah, we pay for this account. We use it, and generally we'll just give the students access to Ohms. But if they're working on a different project, like helping us upload interviews or something like that, they could access this. But typically we'll show them SoundCloud and how it works, and then give them the Ohms login, and that's where they will do the indexing that Lisa will show you. But this has been great and it's been very user-friendly, very accessible. And when we interview someone, we want to give the interviewee a copy of that interview. And if they are okay with that, with accessing it digitally, we'll just link them to this, and then they can also share that link with their loved ones. So that's worked really well. Yeah, been very easy to share. So we've had no problems basically using this platform. If there's anything else, I think next slide, please.
Okay, so you heard Alanna mention Ohms a few times, and I will forever sing the praises of Ohms. It's a free program that really can do amazing things. So it's essentially a sort of plug-in that you can put into really any kind of, it's totally adaptable for different kinds of presentations. And on the Ohms website, oralhistoryonline.org, there's a number of featured examples. And so I encourage people who are interested in creating any sort of oral history accessible website, right, to look at some of these examples. I found them to be really inspiring and were the basis of some of the projects that I then assigned to my students. So Ohms, the oral history metadata synchronizer, is a way to store your interviews and then put in some of that context, the contextual information, and it's also a way to catalog the interviews in a way that will then make them searchable and accessible to the public when they're plugged into a website. So I'm going to go ahead and demonstrate this by sharing my screen. Okay, can you see my screen?
Yeah.
Okay, excellent. So this is for MUSE Winston-Salem. Ohms works with SoundCloud, so you can just pull in the audio file and create a new file in Ohms. You can give it a collection ID number or name, which we've done here to kind of indicate the collection. So it can be kind of easily searchable and organized just from this back end. And then students or anyone can enter in the metadata in the back end and index for the interview. You can also write out the transcripts, which we haven't done that part, right? But we found the metadata and indexing to be incredibly helpful once we make it publicly accessible. So let me show you one example of kind of what it will look like and what the students have been doing. This is just one interview that has been indexed. All right, so the index is by timestamp, right? Students have to listen to sections of the interview and give it a short title by content, right? And then within each segment, they provide a synopsis and keywords and subjects. The keywords will be searchable on the MUSE Winston-Salem website when it's made public. And then the subjects connect to the Library of Congress. So we're using Library of Congress subject headings so that these, if people enter in these subjects in a Google search, they'll come to these interviews at MUSE Winston-Salem. So students entered in all of that in the kind of back end. And then pretty much this is what a viewer will see on the MUSE Winston-Salem website when it's up. They can search through like this. They can search by keyword, and then they can always play a segment if they want to just skip straight to that one segment of an interview instead of having to listen to the entire thing.
We lived there together for about a year, and then one day somebody was kicking down my door, and I realized it was police.
Okay. All right, so I'm happy to answer any other questions about Ohms, but I just wanted to give you a very quick tour of it, and I'll stop sharing now. And I want to now go on to some of the models of collaboration using Ohms, using SoundCloud, and working on this. Thank you. Working with these platforms. Okay. Next slide. Next slide, please. There we go. Okay, so the first model is one in which this is a collaboration between my class and a community partner. In this case, it was Project Reentry. But it's also a model of an ongoing museum academic partnership using materials that were created in this class with this collaboration with the community partner. So the course was Public History, History 367. I taught it in the fall of 2014. And the the project was the class was the project. Students wanted to create an exhibit about incarceration and the process of reentry for former offenders. And so working with Project Reentry, they interviewed former offenders about their experiences with reentry and collected some of their art materials created in and out of prison. And the students created an exhibit from these materials that went up in downtown Winston-Salem. But they also created this kind of body of oral histories, right? These interviews with former offenders. And those interviews were donated then to the museum. And a few months after the exhibit came down from its place in downtown Winston-Salem, it went into what was then the New Winston Museum to dovetail with the museum's programming in 2016.
Yep. And then also some long-term outcomes of that include that museum volunteers actually took it further and recorded more interviews along that theme. So we have an even bigger collection of stories related to incarceration and reentry. And then we did a program series, as Lisa mentioned, that related to this theme for several months in late 2016, I believe it was. Next slide.
So the next course project is a model of a different origin for the collaboration. In this case, I found a course title, which was Topics in North Carolina History, and created a course that was designed to contribute to the museum's grant-funded project that the museum had already developed.
Yes, so we had already been in conversations to create a multifaceted project about local music history that would include a digital jukebox, maybe a physical exhibit, some other digital materials. And then we were able to, like, as Lisa said, partner with her to have her students really enrich this project by creating this, this exhibit with oral history interviews as well. And we got some grant funding from the Arts Council that we were able to use toward this project on our end as well.
So my role in this partnership was to train the students in interviewing. I provided them with release forms and recorders and tested out the iPhone model, which ended up being superior. The students received interview contact information from the museum staff. So they chose a musical genre, they did independent research, they developed interview questions, and then they found people who were musicians in each musical genre and interviewed them together in pairs. And then the point of the big group project then was to create an exhibit. And so the museum staff helped give kind of training and pointers on how to create an effective exhibit, how to use oral histories and kind of little pieces of an interview in a text to give it the most, to highlight the big point, right? So museum staff gave feedback on student presentations as they were developing their ideas for the exhibit, and also edited the panels before final printing. So this kind of partnership, at least from the professor's perspective, right, was good in that the outcomes did reach some of the learning objectives that I had for the class, right? So that students had the opportunity to practice a big practice group work, independent research, creating sources that were not existent before, and also thinking about the museum's needs, as well as the interests and perspective of their interviewees, and thinking about the audience, right? So they had to really consider different stakeholders in this exhibit and to consider how to work collaboratively with non-university entities. The students indexed these interviews and donated and entered into Ohms. So they were uploaded into SoundCloud, and then they indexed them in Ohms, and that's still an ongoing process. But students had that experience of kind of going through the process of donating the oral histories to the museum, indexing them, trying to make sense of them for the museum, and then they created an exhibit that was put on display at in the lobby or the entrance of the New Winston Museum at the time.
And as far as long-term outcomes of this is a great example of the life and usefulness of this material and these recordings going way beyond the semester in which the students initially did the work. We've had subsequent interns who've taken some of these recordings, and so there were audio recordings, and we've had students take them and turn them into accessible video clips, like 3 or 5 minutes long, with accompanying photographs and that kind of thing, and had people study this material for other projects as well. So that's been really great to see. And the grant funding that we received from the Arts Council for this, we used for a contractor to create that digital jukebox that we mentioned earlier. And that project is still in progress, but it's something that we definitely hope to be able to put out there, because it's really super cool, and it'll be a great resource. So hopefully that'll be something all of you can see in the future. Next slide.
All right, another model I want to share with you is one in which I created a course unit in one of my courses. This was a course called Making History, which is a history methods course. And but I think that the goals of the unit were such that this is something that could be put really into any class, no matter what the title of the class or the other content of the course. I think there's a lot of possibility for creating a unit like this. So in this class, and I know there's a lot of text on this slide, I really just cut and paste from my assignment that I gave the students, but there's a lot of kind of walking them through the steps, because this was a unit on oral history and digital history and public history. So they had to really think about digital tools and learned how to use them. So the purpose of the assignment was to use the collections in Ohms to create material that would be on the public-facing portion of the oral history collection when the museum website was unveiled, right? So we're trying to create content for the museum website by utilizing these oral histories in Ohms. So we were using a model, I don't know if anyone has seen the Seattle Civil Rights and Labor History Project, but for me, I think this is great. It has oral histories, it has scanned primary sources, and then there are student essays that make sense of those collections. And so I wanted to provide content like that would be readily available if the MUSE Winston-Salem decided to use it for their website to kind of beef up their collection, or at least introduce researchers on the public-facing side, like how to make sense of these oral histories beyond just a list of names and dates. I also wanted the students to get experience on kind of the metadata side of things, right? So using the Ohms interface to index and to have experience with those Library of Congress subject headings, and to really think about what those headings can reveal about the kind of subjective thinking, the role of the archivist behind the scenes in creating these collections. And so they were to write analytical essays that made sense of the interviews, and also practiced using another plugin called SoundSite, which would allow them to kind of do a hyperlink or highlight a certain section of their essay. And when a user scrolled over that, they would actually get the audio, kind of link directly to the audio of the oral history, where they could hear someone explaining the concept or the idea. So it's a kind of a different way to think about writing digitally for the students. The students used the veterans interviews in Ohms, and the original assignment was to index and timestamp 2 interviews each for each student. That ended up being a bit too much, so we scaled down as we went along in order to fit into the 7-week unit. I received training in SoundSight from Wake Forest Library Specialist, and then I taught those students, but it was a really kind of dynamic process, and we spent a lot of class time actually workshopping SoundSight and working on Ohms together, kind of in the silent room, and then someone would kind of pop up with a question and we'd workshop it together. In terms of the learning outcomes, I liked this unit. The students did complain that they spent a lot of time learning new programs, right? They had to learn Ohms, they had to learn Library of Congress catalog access, they had to learn SoundSight. So they definitely got experience in all of the training necessary to use these digital platforms. And they questioned the utility of those skills. They were not sure how they would use them in the future, when so much of their other coursework just still required Word documents. But they really loved listening closely to the interviews. I think they became better listeners because they had to do the indexing project. They appreciated the content in a much deeper way when they then had to think about how to characterize each portion of the interview. And they also appreciated the challenge of creating an essay for a public audience, right? It wasn't just for the instructor, right? But they were thinking about what would someone looking at a museum's website need to know about these oral histories. So they appreciated that challenge quite a bit.
So I'm going to talk a little bit about the status of the museum's website, because we talked about how a lot of these things are, we're aiming to put these resources up on that website, and that doesn't exist right now. So as I mentioned earlier, we went through the rebranding and all of that. And so we had, when we were new at the museum, we had a website that did have some of these resources available, nothing to the extent of what we're hoping to build, but it did have some oral histories accessible, and it had some of videos of our programs and things of that nature. Went through the rebranding in January and switched to a new landing page website for MUSE Winston-Salem. So as we work towards reopening, we are also working towards building a new website that will be full of resources like our oral history database and some of the accompanying materials. So we really hope to be a hub for local and regional oral history, and to have that be, one of the main things that people know that they can find through us and study through our database and that kind of thing. So we, the more accessible we begin to make that material, it will really lend itself to more collaborations with students and universities, and we hope to continue to be able to build those relationships. We have some students this summer working on creating some podcasts from oral histories they are capturing, and we hope to be able to do more of that with things that are even already in our collection, as well as creating videos and using these for many types of research projects and other types of partnerships. So that's something that we're building, that we're going to continue to work on, and all of the projects that we've talked about today would be able to be there, as well as the rest of our collection and many things that we add on to it in the future. Next slide, please. Okay, so just some examples of some of the different types of collaborations we have done with students. We have, for the past this will be the 4th year that we've worked with Michael Brooks, a professor from NCA&T. He teaches counseling to doctoral candidate students. So we work with his students every fall, and we assign them. We've done it a couple of different ways. Sometimes they'll be in groups and they'll study a few different oral histories, or sometimes it's one per student. But we assign them oral history interviews that are already existing in our database, and they do qualitative analysis on those interviews and see what they can learn about the interviewee and Winston-Salem overall from either that one interview or a small collection. And then they will present their projects at the end of the semester. And it's been really great. We've been able to invite some of the interviewees and some museum board members to attend those programs. And it's been really powerful for everybody who attended. It's been great to hear what the students learned, and the people who've attended have loved hearing from them. And it really connected some of those students to local history in a way that they had not been connected before. And then just another quick example of a collaboration, we have done some staged readings of veterans' oral histories. Cindy Briggs is a local documentarian that we partner with, and she's done well over 100 veterans oral history interviews that she does under the umbrella of MUSE Winston-Salem, and we archive them. And so she selected some of those veterans interviews and partnered with Wake Forest University. Brooke Davis directed it, and there was sponsorship from the Interdisciplinary Performance and the Liberal Arts Center, and they did staged readings of those in, I think, 2017 and 2019. There's been a few of them, and those have also been really well received and a great way to connect more people to that content. Lisa?
Yeah, so another model, and we'll hit this very quickly so we can get to the question, is internships, right? This is something that is important for me as the coordinator of the Cultural Heritage and Preservation Studies. Students do want experience in art, history, anthropology institutions, and they love working with oral history. And so I can create these internships really quickly, automatically. Yes, let's do some work in Ohms, right? So I find that this is a great partnership, an ongoing partnership for that reason too, right? If I hear from a student who wants some individual experience working in museum context, then this is, yeah, perfect opportunity.
And then just before we wrap up, I can just note a couple of the other ways we have had student interns work with oral history over the years. So we've had students that have helped create and complete our oral history inventory database. We've had students create walking tours with original oral history interviews as a main part of their content development. We've done digital and physical exhibition creation stemming from oral history interviews. And then of course, having students index the interviews and shadow us as we record interviews and then go on to record their own interviews. And as I mentioned, creating video clips from the audio recordings, which really helps to make it more accessible and is a good way for us to be able to put that content out there. And to the final slide, please.
All right, so thinking as we kind of reflect on this partnership and the value that I see in it, first of all, oral histories, right? Local and community oral histories really offer students an opportunity to engage with Winston-Salem. They feel more connected to their home, at least it's their home for a few years, and they get out of the college bubble, at least for those conducting interviews. This is really important and really valuable and transformative for them. And it decenters the university and professors as the only legitimate source of information and knowledge, right? So students, by accessing oral histories, can see the huge variety of experiences and knowledge outside of the university. And I think this builds the virtues, right, of empathy, perspective, and open-mindedness in students. Finally, what I've found, especially in the methods courses in history, is that students often consider the trend toward source digitization as a positive development that democratizes the archive. And these partnerships actually provide an opportunity to really critically assess that assumption, right? So the actual work of making the interviews accessible to broad audiences actually reveals to the students the subjective decisions that go into indexing, reveals the mediated nature of digital sources in new ways.
Yeah, and we think it's valuable to continue to develop these relationships to expose students to the work that museum professionals do and to teach them what the value of oral history is and give them this opportunity to connect with local history, as Lisa said. This kind of engagement can really personalize it for them. spark their interest and their curiosity and help them build really lasting connections that can have, you know, potentially lifelong legacies well beyond just the time that they are in school, and helping to teach the students the value of also broadening the historical record by recording these interviews and getting including more voices and making history more representative. And that's really valuable to be able to teach that to students as well. So from a pretty young age, they can think about it that way and understand the importance of that. So it is really important to us, and we hope to continue working with partnerships like this because it's been really successful for us.
All right.
Ready for questions?
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Lisa and Alanna. We have one question so far. It is, how difficult is it to embed Ohms into a website's content management system?
Well, we haven't got there yet. Lisa, have you done it at all in your, as you've learned about Ohms? Have you done it?
Oh my gosh, it was probably 4 years ago now when I first tried it, when I was learning Ohms. And and I actually tried to do it with the New Winston Museum at the time. And the system just needs to be updated. The website is actually really easy. And Ohms has a number of, they have video trainings on every aspect of Ohms, including how to make it sync up with other, cloud storage programs, and also how to put it into a website. So I don't remember the kind of nitty gritty of it, but I remember it actually being really easy if your website is sophisticated enough to handle plugins.
Yeah, we had that was with the old WordPress website that had a lot of old plugins and outdated things on it. So I think as we're moving forward, throughout this year and next year and getting closer to doing that, I don't anticipate it being difficult since Ohms has been very easy to work with everything up to this point. So yeah, I think it can vary, probably like Lisa said, based on how what platform your website has been created on. But whoever's asking that question, feel free to contact us in the future. If we can offer you more help with that as we do it, we'd be happy to.
Yeah. And I would also say that Ohms was created by this one professor at the University of Kentucky, and I've emailed him with questions, technical questions, and he emails right back right away. So
Doug's amazing.
It is.
So we are over time, unfortunately. We had one more question come in. Thank you very much, Alanna and Lisa, for that presentation. Sorry. So we will come back at 3 o'clock for the Hidden Town Project with Meredith Farmer and Daniel Ackerman from the Old Salem Museums and Gardens.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks again, Lisa
Thank you so
and
much.
Alanna. All right, thanks.
Thank you.